So let's go ahead and get started. I just wanted to thank you all for joining us tonight for this special presentation. I just want to start by acknowledging that those of us who are in Seattle are on native Duwamish land today. And if you'd like to make rent payments directly to the Duwamish in order to support the revival of the Duwamish culture and the vitality of the Duwamish tribe, you can do so at realrentduwamish.org. We're going to share that link in the chat. And the land where Jim's race took place is the rightful land of the Spokane tribe. So you can learn more about the Spokane tribe at spokanetribe.com. And just so you know about this resource, if you're anywhere in Washington state, you can visit washingtontribes.org to learn about whose tribal lands you might be living in or occupying or recreating on any given day. So if you're out exploring the lands of Washington, it's just a resource to be able to be aware of whose land you're on. And I just also wanted to share another resource with you all. Those of you who are familiar with Bikeworks know that we're a nonprofit organization with a mission to promote the bicycle as a vehicle for change. And we do that through our youth programs. We have adult programs as well. We have a pretty robust bicycle recycling initiative, recycling close to 8,000 bikes every year, getting them out of the landfill and out on the streets to be ridden, give them away in the community. And one of our core values is social justice. So we're not just about bikes, we're also about community and about justice and about equity. And so we do have our racial equity action plan up on our website on bikeworks.org/about. I'm going to share that link as well. So that's our racial equity plan. It covers 2017 through 2020. We'll have a new version of the plan coming out sometime next year, and I just wanted to share that with you as members of our community so that you can hold us accountable to the goals that are in that plan. And also, if you maybe work for an organization that is having conversations about racial justice right now and are interested in writing a racial equity action plan, that can maybe be a resource or a template place to get started. And we're happy to answer questions about that. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce Jim Labayen. He is our senior program coordinator running both youth and adult programs at Bikeworks. Jim has spent many years of his career in youth bicycle education, both at Bikeworks running programs and also as a ride leader for the Major Taylor project. And with all that said, I'm gonna pass it over to Jim.
Thanks, Elise. Hey everyone, my name is Jim Labayen, and you're going to listen to the most important thing that I've done in my entire life. And I know it's just a simple bike ride, but I hope that I can convey to you the importance because of everything that it's meant to me. And so that being said, there's a lot of emotional topics for me here, and I wish to express my vulnerability with you, and I can tell you that I'm feeling really anxious right now just because speaking in front of people in general, even though I'm talking to my phone right now, is just a huge trigger of mine. So I'm trying to hold it together. Before I get started here, I just wanted to thank Elise for the acknowledgments of our commitment to social justice, but also I just wanted to call out that specifically there are members of our community who are going through a really hard time right now. And if they are suffering, we are also suffering. And I hope you know who I'm talking about, and that is members of the Black community, but also something that has been going on for the last few months is discrimination against people of East Asian descent because of the stigmatization that the COVID-19 virus is affiliated with Chinese people, which is simply not true. So I just wanted to call those things out, that all of us have the duty to call out racism, but also to actively dismantle laws, institutions, social norms, and other systems that uphold racism. So thank you, and let's get started. Thanks, Jess. We can move on to the next slide. So a little bit about me. You'll see a picture of me there from a much younger Jim, AKA like 4 years ago, 25 years old. And one of the most formative things in my life, I think, is that I am a first generation American here. Both of my parents are from the Philippines. My mother immigrated here as an undocumented undocumented immigrant with only $50 in her pocket that she borrowed from her parents. And my great-grandfather in the Philippines started the first electrical plant in Bacolod City. And he only did this with a third grade education. And my grandfather, who recently passed away, really wanted to escape to a different city in the Philippines, and he could not afford the fare to ride a ship. So what he did is that he snuck onto the ship and tied himself to the mast so that he could escape his city. And the reason why I'm saying this is that adversity and doing things the hard way and just, you know, pushing through the grit is what my family is about. And I try and embody that as much as I can. And this is one of those stories that you'll learn is one of those times. And on the superficial level, if you haven't met me, it's really easy to know that I love sugar. I love baked goods in whatever form they come in, almost to a fault. And I'm a huge lover of type 2 fun. If you're not familiar with this concept, it's basically that what experience you're going through is not pleasurable in the moment. However, after the fact, you gain an appreciation for it, and you kind of learn to love to push through that grit, which you're learning is a theme here. So eating spicy food is something I would consider type 2 food for some people. I've been into bikes my entire life, and I kind of channel all of this that I've been talking about through my bike riding, whether it's bonding with other people, education, and also my own personal liberation through the things that I experienced as a child, and just trying to live up to my family's legacy. So I wanted to tell you about when I first learned about this race. Actually, one of the people who told me about it is here in this room, so thank you, Fiona. Just we can move to the next slide. Thanks. So I quit 4-time part jobs to start working at Bikeworks here, and I've almost been here for 2 years, and that time has flown by. But I've always wanted to make my passion and my main activity my career. So I've been employed in the cycling industry for as long as I was of working age. And of course, family is one of my most important values. So I chose to, instead of living in Seattle, to live in Lakewood, where my family was at the time. And I was commuting. And because I'm a cyclist, I think there's a lot of intersectionality with being an environmentalist as well. So I didn't want to have a huge carbon footprint. I did have a car, however, I figured I'd take the bus both ways. This was a 4 to 5 hour round trip on top of a 8-hour workday. And of course, on top of this, I was managing, a dating life, friends and family, personal pursuits outside of work. And I was also racing cyclocross, so training to be, at best a mediocre athlete in the greater Seattle area. And so my life has been defined by one major challenge, at least every single year. And a lot of you in this room here have been here, have been with me for those challenges. But this is one that I did mostly by myself, but I had people supporting me. And this was 24 hours around the clock. And so I can tell you a little bit about the race here on the next slide. So this race is in Spokane, and it's been volunteer run since 1999. My friend told me it was the last year that it was going to be in production. So this is the 20th year. And you see the little banner there at night before the race. It's in May on Memorial Day weekend, Riverside State Park. And the premise of the race is really simple, easier said than done. Just ride your bike for as long as you can for 24 hours. And it's in like a wooded area, much like the cloth background behind me, really sparsely wooded, except instead of all that luscious greenery, it's just rocks. So it's a little bit of a technical course. 12 and a half long laps, because you don't want to do point A to B on something this strenuous. So, you can always pass by your loved ones or whoever's supporting you at that time. And you can do teams of up to 6 in a relay style, where one person can do 1 lap, the next person will do the next lap. You can do pairs, or you can do solo. And me being the person who I am, I kind of reluctantly committed, but I chose solo just because I thought it was appropriate for me and my life experiences leading up to this. And you see about 450 to 850 participants. So when I started to consider the possibility, you know, it was, I kind of kept it secret because when I have these huge schemes in my mind, it seems like if I tell a lot of people, I'm increasing the amount of pressure that is on me. And if I don't do what I say I'm going to do, I'm going to let myself down and I'm going to let other people down. So I tend to really, really prepare, excuse me, and then do it. And then tell people like, you know, a couple weeks beforehand. So that's why, you know, a lot of people didn't know about this until later on this spring. I committed in December of 2018. And so I put together a training plan. You know, I knew physical preparation was going to be a really long process, but really a lot of this was going to be mental. And so just a lot of mental conditioning involved, and I'll share some of the tactics that I used for that. And really, in order to do this race, I needed to call upon my entire life, every single thing that I've learned, all the mentorships that I've had, all the important people in my life, and just call upon even the not so good experiences as well, and the things that I've learned from them. That little picture that you saw on the last slide there shows my love for sugar. It's Sloy's Bakery in Paulsbo. I'm a frequent visitor there. So to prepare, you know, it wasn't cheap to enter this race, and I did a couple races building up to it in order to get that like high level intensity. So I started a GoFundMe. I had a lot of close friends and family contribute, and if you're in this room, I'm severely grateful. So thank you very much. I asked for a support crew. You know, this is a solo effort on my part. I'm doing the hardest work, arguably, but I got my brother and my two closest friends, who I believe are on this call, to be a support crew for me, whether it's like giving me some clothing, helping me eat, reminding me to like take care of myself. And you know, at the time in December, just winter cycling in the Pacific Northwest is just not fun. I hope you all can relate. And I lit a fire under my butt, and I started riding a lot in December, and then January hit, and I was kind of keeping up the volume. But then in February, I don't know if you remember, in 2019 of last year, we had a huge snowstorm, and it kind of just prevented me from riding. I'm not a huge fan of riding indoors, like on a stationary bike either. It doesn't really seem authentic. So I was just going to build up the fortitude mentally in that time and start to live a more balanced life. And mind you, while I was preparing, my boss can attest to this, I was still working full time, trying to do the best job I could. I was doing contract work with the Major Taylor Project, which you'll learn a little bit more about on my days off. And on top of that, you know, normal life stuff. So on the next slide here, you'll see what my training volume looks like. I know it's just a whole bunch of numbers and graphs, but basically each one of those little blue lines is a week, and you can see there that the darkened one is the week of the 24-hour race. So I did a little bit over 200 miles that week and 23 hours of riding. And so my training plan that I set forward for myself was short, intense rides on the weekdays before or after work. Usually it was after work, just because I'm lazy by nature, and then long and really easy weekend rides. And easy meaning going slow, but you know, of course, whenever you're like 8 hours into a ride, it's not going to be easy. And so I did some number crunching. You can kind of make some inferences on the graph there as when I was more active, you know, steady build starting in late February, but low end 6 hours of cycling in a week, and then high end 28 hours of cycling. And you know, 28 hours is equivalent to another part-time job, and so just trying to do my best, honestly. And there were about 53 official days when I kitted up, when I got into my spandex and I like intended to go train. So yeah, it was a lot. And so I just wanted to share briefly some of the photos. I won't go into too much depth of the rides because I'll make this more about the messaging and the race itself. But this photo here is in Alki Beach, and you're looking at downtown Seattle, at sunset. And I was kind of unsatisfied with my performance. You'll see the date there, the caption, it's March 3rd, and this is right after snowpocalypse, as Elise entered into the chat. So I was like, you know, I got to light a fire under my butt again. And so I did a century or 100 miles. And, you know, I wasn't really in good shape for it, and it really hurt. But I just found a little bit of beauty in this end of the day here. I think that was at like mile 80 or so. On the next slide, nothing particularly like interesting about this ride other than the scenery. You know, this is in North Bend. My friend Alvaro, if you're listening, he was trying to meet up with me and do a ride, and it's a friendship that I've been trying to maintain. He was like, you know, there's this road that I want to explore out at North Bend. Do you want to carpool with me? Do you want to meet me there by driving over? And I'm like, you know, I think I'm going to ride over there and meet you. And so I did. I left really early, and then I was so tired because I'd done a bigger ride the night before that we only rode together for about an hour and a half. And then I turned around and went home, and it was a little crushing on the tail end there. One of the most memorable rides, I think, this was to go visit my friend Corey, who's here in this room, who's on my support crew. But another intentional friendship that I'm trying to maintain. She lives and works out in Orcas Island, and you know, it's hard to get out there on a weekend, and of course I wanted to do it by bike and not by car, so I managed this 3-day weekend. Thank you, Bikeworks. And I rode there 115 miles, and when I was doing so, I texted her and I was like, hey, what are the chances you want to do Mount Constitution, climb up it on our bikes when I get there? And I think I got there at around I don't know, like 6-7 p.m. around dinner time, so we didn't really eat dinner, and I kind of peer pressured her into doing this. And, you know, she wasn't really active cycling at the time, so it was hard on both of us, but for different reasons. And this is the view at the top looking at Mount Baker in Whatcom County, really spectacular. And if you've ever cycled Mount Constitution, you know it's not steep at all. So we watched a movie the next day, which is one of the reasons I came up there. And then the day after that, Denise, who just commented, can attest to this. I rode home. I started at 8 a.m., another 115 miles in time to coherently teach a class at Bikeworks on how to repair your bicycle for adults. And Denise, I don't know if it was coherent at all, but in my opinion, it was, but maybe I was just speaking gibberish. The next ride, how I knew I was rightfully ready for this race, this 24-hour race, was that I knew I needed to get some nighttime riding in, because you can't have a 24-hour race without that. So on May 4th, Saturday, I got off at 6:30 p.m. And I took a melatonin so that I could fall asleep earlier in the day. I took it at 6 p.m., 30 minutes before I got off. And I went home. I live, you know, like a mile and some change away from Bikeworks, and I didn't really eat much, went to bed, and I set my alarm for 1:30 in the morning. And I woke up and I rode, and I was like, you know, I kind of want to ride to Mount Baker because that's a really sentimental location, but I just don't think I had it in me that day. So I went to Bellingham instead, where I went to school. I paid a visit to my friends at the Western Washington University cycling team. And of course, me being addicted to sugar, I had to go to my favorite cafe in Edison, Washington called Tweets. If you ever pass by the area, they're cash only, only support local farms around there. Highly recommend it. They have the best Rice Krispie on planet Earth. And you can tell them that Jim sent you. So I rode there, and it wasn't open, but I had a good ride with my friends and my temporary family. That is the Western team. And so what I learned from this ride is that you just can't really set high expectations for yourself. You got to reward yourself in the smallest ways. And for me, that was the company of my friends. So on the next slide, you'll see just a quick GPS route. I won't linger on this too much, but Seattle to Bellingham, if you're ever interested in doing it, one or both ways, highly recommend it. This used to be on the Red Bell or RSVP, I think. You've probably ridden a very similar route. So I'm going to skip over the rest of the training rides, and you know, let's just say that those 3 rides, so I'll leave you with, or those 4 rides, I'll leave you with those, and you can kind of imagine what those few months of preparation were like. So I was ready for Spokane. Me, Gus, my brother, and Logan and Corey, my 2 best friends, we were going to drive over. And, you know, we had everything from a cooler full of drinks to food to tents, because my friend was going to, they were all going to spend the night while I was out racing and pedaling. And when we're on Snoqualmie Pass, I'm looking at the RPMs of my car, and it's just in the red, and I back off and it does nothing, and I hear this like popping noise, and my engine overheated and my head gasket had blown, and it's pouring rain at this point, and I'm sitting in my car. I'm like, I don't think I'm going to make it. And at this point, like, I'm just wallowing in all my sorrows. And Logan and Corey went back to Seattle, and Corey's mom lent us a car for the weekend. So thank you, Joe, very much. I know you're here on this call. I couldn't have done this race without you. So the rest of the road trip was thankfully uneventful. By the way, my car didn't make it out of that alive. I sacrificed a car for this race. The rest of the road trip was uneventful, and we had an Airbnb that night. I think we got there later in the day, like 8 p.m., had a dinner. I forgot what it was exactly, but Logan made a really good dessert, one of my favorite desserts. So thank you, Logan. And just divvied out the roles that I need people to fill. And so you can see here on the right-hand part of the screen, all the roles that I needed. Hugs from everybody just for morale. My shoulders, neck, and lower back get sore on longer rides, so I just need massages. People to remind me to hydrate and to eat food. People to wake me up when I took naps. Of course, there would be a lot of like GPS tracking and lights in the middle of the night, so I needed to swap out certain devices that I had with me, and just general reminders to take care of myself. So if you look at the bottom right there, if you can barely read it, it says 19 hours of riding time. And how we had calculated that is that I was going to take a certain amount of breaks, which was 2 hours and 20 minutes every 2 or 3 laps of that course. And then I was also going to sleep in the middle of the night for, I think it's like an hour or 2 hours there. I can't exactly tell because of the red marker, but those are the roles that people filled for me. And I am so indebted to you, the 3 of you, Gus, Logan, and Corey. So thank you very much. I love you all. So come race day, we drove to the course. The weather was looking pretty good, I think, with a small chance of rain overnight. And if you know me, if you've ridden with me before, you know that I despise riding in the rain. Like I literally would do anything else. I would do my next least favorite activity besides ride in the rain. So I wasn't letting it psyching myself out. I was just thinking, it's not going to rain. I was kind of in denial about it, honestly. I said 850 people registered for this event, but only about 200 people showed up. And the vibe was really like a block party or a music festival. So really goofy vibes. You can see here that someone had named their team the Gnome Stretch, and they were all wearing costumes on their heads. I just started looking around and kind of socializing a little bit and realizing things that I've known about the cycling community and about the bike racing community in particular, which is that there's a huge inequity and inequality, of course, in the wealth, but also in the representation, whether it's the race, the ethnicities out there, the genders, ages, and just the physical or mental abilities. And I found myself not really belonging. I was one of the few people of color. I was probably only one of 2 Filipinos. And I had a drastically under-equipped bike in comparison to a lot of people out there. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, if you can kind of question like why I'm bringing, like identity politics into this, some people might say is that, representation does matter in cycling. And the reason why is because there's so many people who have access to biking in the world, and even people who do not have access to bicycling who would like access. And the resources in their community are just not available. And it is because of racism, and it is because of systemic wealth inequality. So what I'm urging people to do here is to fight for systemic change in cycling, but also in larger society. So when I came to this race, I decided that I needed to represent something larger than just me. So I wore the jersey of a former employer, and it was an employer called Major Taylor Project. If you're from the Seattle or Tacoma area, you're probably familiar with it. If you don't know who Major Taylor himself was, Marshall Major Taylor was the first African American champion of any sport, I believe, and he won a world championship in 1892, I believe. And you can imagine this is only 30 years after slavery had, quote unquote, been abolished. And Major Taylor was experiencing lots of racism, overt and covert. And, just from simply being denied the opportunity to race to just something that I read the other day, that he was choked out by a fellow competitor, and people watched this happen. And that competitor who choked him out into unconsciousness only got fined $50 and was allowed to participate. I'm getting a little angry here, sorry, just thinking about this. And so this, while things like that might not be prevalent today, and they still are, just in other formats and in different environments, the exclusivity of cycling is a remnant of that racism. So what I'm fighting for, and what I stand for, and the work that I do, and the writing that I do, stands for inclusivity and representation. So you'll see that jersey in a couple of photos here. But coming to the start of the race, I had really, I was kind of calm, I think, and it had a really interesting format. It was called a Le Mans start. 24-hour racing began in motorsports racing, and what people would do is that they would run towards their car and then start the race. And this is what would happen for the 24-hour mountain bike race as well. So we did a 600-meter dash in a small loop. And you can see here, Theo and my friend Austin, both very good riding buddies. They were the first two to come back. And so they're very fast runners, and I was not even in the distance. I was long past them. And the reason why is because I didn't want to be pressured into going too fast, burning all my matches before I could even start riding. And so I was kind of like mid to front. And so I started riding. I went on my first lap. And here you'll see a course map. You can't really see too much on the description, but I just wanted to show you a photo and the elevation chart in the lower left. For whatever reason, I didn't ride the course beforehand, so I had no idea what was coming up ahead. And what was going through my head before the race is that I had an experience riding with the Major Taylor Project, which serves to introduce cycling and maintain cycling culture within young people of color. And so there was this young man who I won't name, and I did the one-day STP with him. And what he told me the morning of is that he hadn't ridden his bike all year in 2018. And I was disapproving. I was like, this is not going to be safe. But this guy did it. And I'm so impressed with him. It was such a hard day, but I figured if Marshall Major Taylor could ride 1,732 miles in 6 days, with the world rooting against him, and if this young man in Major Taylor Project could do the STP without any training, I could do this. I could just ride this lap and rely on my skills. So after the first lap, you get to the starting gate, which you'll see here. And just so you're not, getting in the way of volunteers who are doing the timing and whatnot, you have to duck under this barrier and walk your bike. There's a lot of rule bending here, as you can see in the lower right photo. This man is definitely not walking. He is more like trotting or jogging. And this will become pertinent later in the story, I believe. And then you take your timing chip, which is how they timed your laps, and wave it over that little piece of, I don't know what it is on that table there. And all throughout the course, just to make sure that people were safe, but also to track, if your times were legitimate or not, you'd have to yell your number out at a volunteer. So mine was 6. So this, I would have to yell my number like pretty much a dozen times out there. And it got a little exhausting just to say 6 every single time. So I'm going to skip over a lot. And if you're interested in learning more about this race, you can visit my blog. I wrote about this experience in 2 different blog posts. But 8 hours went by, and I was getting consistent lap times, all within an hour of each other. If you're wondering how long a lap took, it was about an hour and 10 minutes for me, at least. I was going at a conservative pace. There were people who were doing it in under an hour, who are just monsters. Like, they're really great riders. But something I think my boss told me, Tina, or someone else, if you're bike touring or doing long distance cycling, you want to act like you're riding along with a newborn baby. And when newborn babies have needs, you got to meet those needs right away. So what I was doing with my baby in that moment was neglecting it. And I was just kind of like in denial, like coasting on. And you can see the good vibes there in that photo. I'm just kind of like cruising along, happy. And after 8 hours of riding, that's when stuff started, and warning signs started to start popping up. So I had some stomach issues. If you're familiar as a cyclist, you start getting hungry after each hour that you ride. And when you're hungry or when you're thirsty, it's too late already. Like you've let your body go too far. So what was happening is that I was getting hungry, and then I was like instantly hitting the wall. My head was getting really foggy. My legs were getting really heavy, and I just couldn't think very well. Some of you know this as bonking if you're a runner or a cyclist. And so that window of being hungry versus bonking was like 15 minutes. So something was happening that day. And on the next slide here, you can just see that consistency that I was talking about. If you look on the left-hand side, the split times, which is otherwise known as a lap time, it's about an hour and some change. So 7 laps gone by, a little bit under 100 miles, I think, and it was starting to get a little dark. So I turned on my lights just for some visibility, and some specks were illuminated in the air. And I'm like, it's probably just a speck of dust, me being the person who I am. And I'm definitely in denial that it's drizzling. And it being dark, communicating with my team became difficult. I couldn't tell who was who. We had to be very deliberate about when we were going to meet up and the things that I needed well in advance of time. And I honestly didn't want to stop, because if I did, I would lose my momentum. So I was kind of doing a disservice to my team by not communicating too well with them. And after 2 more laps, I believe, I ended my 9th lap or 10th lap at midnight, around there. And I was just wet and cold, just completely soaked. And I just realized it was time to, call it quits for at least the meantime. I was going to get some rest. So this is when I went to sleep. And I've never had any more conviction than I did in this moment. And it was that my logic was that if I'm wet right now, if I go to sleep and I wake up again and it's still raining, or if it's still wet on the ground, I will get wet again. And that means I'm going to have to ride the rest of this race while wet, which is one of my least favorite feelings in the entire world. And it just makes everything awful. So my logic was, I'm going to go to bed in my wet clothing. And that's what I did. And I went to bed in the back of Logan's car. And I asked them to wake me up after an hour of sleep. So you'll see here a picture of very sleepy Logan. I think that's at 11 p.m. or so. And I was woken up 3 separate times. The first time after that hour, I had a dream, and it was that I was being dragged along on a beach after like a fight or something like that. And when I finally woke up, it was my brother, and he was dragging me out of the car. And I was kicking and screaming, and I was just cussing him out. And I was just really angry. Like, I'm not going outside right now. There's no way. And so I said 30 more minutes, and he woke me up a second time, much more gently this time. And I equally gently just said back to him, I don't want to do this. Give me another hour. So after 2.5 hours of rest, this time Corey tried to wake me up, and in the most sincere voice possible, she says, Jim, it's not raining outside anymore. No one's riding. You can do this. And I listen and to the rain on the rooftop, and it's still coming down, but not as hard. The rain that night was particularly bad. It would qualify as a storm, I would say. And I'm just angry at that moment, because I know that she's lying to me, but in a good way. She's just trying to motivate me. And so I sit up and I just say, if I don't do this right now, I'm going to be disappointed in myself. So I get my rain jacket on with the help of my friends, and I put a beanie on, my headlamp, and my front light on my bike, and I start riding. And this is where a couple issues started. I won't go into them here just because we're running low on time. But I started talking with some people about what happened during the night. And there were some people who rode alongside me who said how bad that storm was. And they are truly the champions. They were the people who rode through the night. And I respect you if that was you. one of those people, including Kellen, our shop manager. So hats off to you, Kellen. So on the next slide here, I was going through a particularly rough point of the course called troll pavement. And it sounds like what it is, tiny little trolls hidden on the trail. And it's about double size of your fist rocks. And they're very jagged, planted in the trail. And what happens, especially when you're on a bike like mine with limited suspension, you get jolted in different ways. And so what was happening is that the jolting was causing my helmet to shift, which would cause my beanie to shift, which would come over my eyes and I couldn't see anymore. And I just told myself, this is, sorry, I'm not trying to swear right now. This is a load of crap. And I was just getting really angry. And at this moment, a woman came up behind me and she says, hey, hey, you paid up for this, right? Or you paid for this event, right? And I didn't take it against her, but I was just really upset at the comment. And it brought me back to this time in my life, one of the most definitive times of my life on a bike. And it was when I was a kid. I was in the Cub Scouts doing a fundraiser by selling popcorn. And if you don't know about the Cub Scouts, selling popcorn for fundraisers, it's because there's a good reason, and it's because all the Girl Scouts get the credit. So you can imagine how successful I was. I wasn't. And I was coming home from the end of my route, and there's this hill that I always make it up, always. And just because I was defeated that day, I got off my bike and I walked. And, it wasn't a big deal. I was like, okay, next time. And as I was walking, this group of teenagers rolled up alongside me in their car and they pointed at me directly and they laughed. And I hung my head in shame, and I was just pissed. I was so pissed. And I got to the top of that hill and I could see my house. Sorry, this is really hard for me to talk about. I saw my house, and 2 blocks away, completely flat, and I could have ridden, but I didn't. And it's because I was just super defeated that day. And when I got home, I just told myself, I made myself a promise. You're never walking up a hill again. Whoops, sorry. So yeah, there's this part of the course called 5-minute hill, and it takes 5 minutes if you're trying really hard. But in my instance, I walked it, and this memory was playing in my head over and over again. And I was just so angry at myself. And it took me 16 minutes instead. And so when I got to the top, I was ready to quit. I was looking out and it was still pouring rain. I was seeing like lights of mountain bikes below me just darting around. And it reminded me of this time when, I was I used to vacation as a kid at this location of the picture that you see. It's Manzanita, Oregon, on the coast. And what would happen is that you're driving on the coast, you're in the shadow, and when you get to this viewpoint and you see this beautiful landscape, the sun just shines on your face and it's the best feeling and it's so beautiful. But when I was bike touring here in December, I rode from Seattle to San Diego during one of the worst coastal storms back in 2015. It did not look like this. You could not see this view. And there were 40-mile-per-hour winds pushing against me. And what would happen is that they would turn me around and I got slammed into the guardrail at one point. It took me several minutes just to be able to get to this viewpoint and continue on. And so what was happening is I got to this point and I'm like, why am I doing this bike tour? I could just turn around. I'm 3 days away from home. and I'm just looking through the wind, ripping through sheets of rain. And I just smile a little bit. And I'm like, I'm doing this because I am just trying to bear through the grit. And it's not about proving anything to anyone else. This is just about me. So back to this race, I'm at the top of this hill and I'm thinking about this moment, and I channel that energy. I'm like, I'm going to ride on. So I do. This is 3 a.m. at this point. And 6 a.m. rolls around. Next slide. Thank you, Jess. And I have some breakfast. But what was happening is I was about to puke with every single bite, and it took so much concentration. And my brother told me in such a lively voice, "You're 18 hours in, Jim. All you have to do is take your last couple of victory laps." And I was sitting in third place, I think. And I finally changed into my dry clothes after 8 hours of, not after 8 hours of being wet, after several hours of being wet. And I started to get my consistent lap times again, my consistent technicality of just pedaling. And so I'll bring you back to the end of the race, lap 16. And, you know, my belief is that I'm sitting in third place, but really at that point, it had become about the numbers and about that placement and about winning a trophy. And so I checked my lap times on my phone, and one is missing. And the thing about the race is that if you get to the end of the race before the deadline, which was noon, you can do another lap. So you can race for more than 24 hours. And I had gone into this race thinking like, yeah, I could do that. And at this point, I'm like, why would I do that though? It's not going to count for anything. No one's going to know because it says I've done one less lap, and I'm not going to get a podium. It's not going to matter. And I'm just angry. I'm having trouble managing my frustration. And I ended up not doing a 17th lap, but I got to the finish line at 11:59 and 50 seconds. So with 10 seconds to spare, and I could have done one. And, you know, I was willing to sacrifice that. I had a lap that didn't exist somewhere according to a timing system, and the race was over. So the result in terms of what I got out of this race, in terms of the numbers, is that I rode about 200 miles. If you were to convert this to like road miles, just because road cycling is arguably easier, it'd be about 300 or 400 miles. And I spent over 19 and a half hours riding. I did get a podium spot. I got a really nice bottle of wine that I'm waiting to open with some loved ones, and a medal. And you can see Gus, Corey, and Logan there alongside me, because this is the solo category of men under the age of 39. However, they had their support crews, and so did I. So you guys belong on the podium step just as much as I do. So what I learned from this, so many things, but I'll spare you a lot of the details. If you want to get good at something, put in your 10,000 hours. For me, that was 8 hours of cycling, not 8 hours of cycling, 8 years of really intense cycling, and just my experience as a first-generation American and all the stuff that I went through as a kid. Do your research on like all the training and all that, and whatever education you need, but ultimately like listen to your body, or listen to your inner consciousness, and do what feels right to you. Experiment with different ways of going about things. Find ways to keep yourself accountable. Honestly, some of the hardest training rides for me were the days where it was just like an hour after when I had done like a 200-mile ride the day before. And how I kept myself accountable was by meeting up with people. Logan was one of my best riding buddies, and we would just meet up and ride that hour out just really slow. So thank you, Logan. Reward yourself in small ways. I already said that based on that really long ride that I did to Bellingham and back. And of course, train for the conditions that you will perform in. I didn't ride in the rain once, I don't think, training for this ride. And I think I could have done a lot better and had a better time, of course. And my last thing, which is the biggest one, I think, which is support diversity in cycling. And what that will look like for everyone is different. But if you don't already buy into this idea, listen to people who are promoting it, and have an open mind and follow their lead, and ask them what you can do. So in terms of what's next, you're wondering what's the next biggest thing. I am open to doing another 24-hour race, but right now I haven't been riding honestly, I've been playing a lot of pickleball, been getting good at it. I'm in a serious relationship right now, but just haven't been riding. So I'm focusing on having fun, riding when I want to. When I want to get back into this type of shape, I want to pioneer an audax, which is a type of ride where you do a really long ride unsupported, this being on the island of Palawan in the Philippines. It's about 300 miles long. I also want to do Paris-Brest-Paris, the Continental Divide. If you want to know more about those, you can look them out. You can look them up on the internet. And if you want to connect with me or just watch me race, or if you want me to watch you race, you can link up with me at MFG or Cross Revolution here in Seattle for cyclocross, or I occasionally race Wednesday Night Worlds. If you care to hear about my adventures, I'd much rather write about these things and talk about them. Like I was saying earlier, you can visit my blog here in the link. So that's all I got in my home tongue. Maraming salamat, and thanks for attending my presentation.
Thank you so much, Jim. Really inspiring, powerful stuff. And thanks to your support team as well. Looks like you all watch them, and I'm glad they can be here today to hear your reflections. We're at a few minutes till 6:30, but I think we're going to do, good Q&A session. So if folks feel like they can't stay past 6:30, that's fine, but we're going to take some time for your questions. We are going to start kicking off the Q&A session with Corey, who's on the call today and was on the support team. Corey was in several of those photos just to give us the point of view perspective from the other side of the race. And so if you're ready, Corey, we'd love to hear your side of the story.
Sure, yeah. I don't want to take up too much time here, but just wanted to start by saying thanks, Jim, for inviting me to share. He also invited Gus and Logan to share just what it looks like to be a volunteer versus a competitor. And it was a blast to be there, and it's a blast to share just some of my favorite memories from the time. I think the two things that I just wanted to highlight from the volunteer and spectator side of things was, first and foremost, this was really personally meaningful and exciting for me. I think Jim plays up his volunteer team a lot, which I appreciate, but also, Jim, you live a life of like generosity, and I think I can safely speak for all three of us who were there supporting you that this was just such a wonderful way to show our gratitude and admiration for you. So it was really, really wonderful to connect and be there to support. But the other thing that I thought was so special about being a volunteer versus actually being racing was getting to interact with the community around us. Like Jim mentioned, this was the 20th and final year of the event. So it was just like loud and obnoxious, and there were people there who had been coming for all 20 years, and there were people there who were there for the first year, like ourselves. And it was just such an energetic place to be, and there was so much community support and joy, and just like, people were passionate, and there's the whole range of passion, from the guy next to us who was taking breaks to barbecue even though he was a solo rider and just kicking back and relaxing, to the guy across from us who had been doing it as a solo ride for like a decade and had this regimented plan. Like, it didn't matter how much time you had to dedicate to train, there were people there doing it and just showing their love for being on mountain bikes. And with that, when you're spectating events like this, I feel like there's often a tendency to look for yourself in the crowd. And as Jim pointed out, this was overwhelmingly a white group of people racing, and so it was very easy for me to find faces that looked like mine when I was spectating. But the thing that I found particularly inspirational was when I saw not only women riding, but women doing the solo riding. They had special tags for if they were a solo rider, and I would see them go by and just be like, oh my gosh, whoever you are, you're my hero. Um, so that was a really inspirational part of it. And I think kind of to tag on to that, Jim's point about working towards more diversity in the cycling world, like seeing faces like mine and seeing women out there riding had me leaving this event with this feeling of like, I could do this too. Like, this is something that I could achieve. I hadn't been racing my bike for a couple of years by then. But just seeing all these people accomplishing it, no matter if you're the barbecue person or the super regimented training plan person, like, you can do events like this and just go out and show the world how much you love bikes. And I think it's true for a lot of other sports too. So yeah, there's a really cool power in spectating and seeing yourself out there. And I think that's something that everyone should have a chance to. But those were the two quick things I wanted to add in. I know we have limited time, so Elise, you could go ahead and maybe start the Q&A for everyone too.
Thanks, Corey, and for emphasizing the continual need to increase access and representation and diversity in cycling, both across race and gender. And Jim also touched on class a little bit, that it's kind of a prohibitively expensive sport in some cases. It looks like Denise had a question.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Hi, Jim. Great race. Oh my gosh, exciting. I just wondered. It seems like you trained a lot and did long distances, and I'm wondering if you're happy with what you did for training, and what would you do something different the next time, if at all?
Yeah, great question, Denise, and also thank you, Corey, for adding in your thoughts. By the way, Denise, I look up to you in many ways as my student, but also as someone who has done lots of prolific cycling. So if you have a chance to listen to Denise and connect with her, she's awesome. What I could have done differently is that I could have ridden my mountain bike more. What I didn't say is that I rode my mountain bike 3 times before this event. I am not a major mountain biker or a very skilled one, but I've done enough to the point where I can rely on muscle memory. So the fitness is what I cared about, but I really recklessly believed that I could ride my mountain bike for 24 hours after not having ridden it for a while. I'm really dedicated into my equipment and like dialing it in to make sure that it fits for me. So I had that on lock. I knew it was going to work. And I did it. So maybe riding my mountain bike more, but honestly, riding in the rain, maybe training longer. Like I only started in February, like I said, but yeah, I am satisfied, but there are some improvables there.
Okay, that sounds great. So you didn't really use your mountain bike. That's interesting. I didn't realize that you were training on your road bike most of the time. Great, thank you very much.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm a road cyclist at heart.
Okay, got it.
Any other questions for Jim? You can put something in the chat or raise your hand. John, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Jim, I know you said you like sweet things. I know that about you personally. I just wanted to ask, what was like the one food item that you ate like during the race that gave you the most amount of joy, and also after the race, because that's really important too.
Dude, honestly, I had a lot more pleasure in the food like during the training. The sour stomach experience really ruined the food during the race itself. And so I didn't eat a whole lot, or I didn't have like a great appetite, and like things were kind of tasteless. But like the holy grail of cycling foods, in my opinion, is a Pro Bar, is what it's called. You can get it at REI or like some grocery stores, but it's a little bit more expensive than I want to pay for if I buy a lot of bars. It's like $3 or $4, and I'd rather pay like 50 cents, $1. And it's Pro Bar, and it's like called the meal, and it has like fruit and like a whole bunch of superfood stuff in it. I know it's like a really boring type of food. It's just like a protein bar, but if I can share, one of my favorite training foods is that I stopped at this cafe, and there's this cinnamon roll the size of my face, and I just like inhaled it, and it made me feel like crap for the rest of the ride, but it was so good. and it's the best cinnamon roll I've ever had.
Sometimes you have to eat a giant cinnamon roll and it's worth it. Ethan has a question.
Yeah. First off, thanks for sharing, Jim. It's good to see you, man. I'm interested to hear like how you got involved with the Major Taylor project and like what sort of work you did with them.
Yeah, that's a great question, Ethan. So Ethan and I are both from Western Washington University, or we both went to school there, and we graduated from the recreation program. So mainly like facilitating recreational experiences. We had to look for a full-time internship for, an entire quarter, and mine was the Major Taylor project. I really, really wanted to like go somewhere like the Philippines or something, which was my first bet, and do it there. But honestly, I ended up back in my hometown of Gig Harbor in Tacoma. And I think it was a sign that this was meant to be. And it led me here to Bikeworks, in fact. And what I did at Major Taylor Project was teach young people how to fix and build up their own bikes, which they got to keep. This is all free and provided in school, after school. And I did some ride leading, just led them on weekly rides. And, it started with this premise of doing a weekly ride. Some of these youth had never ridden before. We taught them how to ride a bike. And then by the end of the year, they were doing the Seattle to Portland bike ride, some of whom did it in one day. It's just a little bit over 200 miles. So it's really inspiring. I gave very little in comparison to what the youth did.
Super rad. Thanks, Jim.
That's awesome. Any other questions from the crowd for Jim? Jim, in case folks on the call aren't aware of the types of programs you run on behalf of Bikeworks, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm the adult program coordinator as well, so I teach Bike Repair 101. If you're an adult looking to learn how to fix your own bike, please come and support us. We have a class that still needs to be filled in October, I believe, through December. If I'm looking at that clipboard right behind my computer screen. We also do the same thing for youth, except, it's a little bit more intimate, groups of 12, and we have them build up their own bike that they get to keep. It's a really special experience. I've been teaching that class for almost 2 years now, and I get so much joy out of it. And I also lead overnight bike tours for youth. It's really special to see, a similar thing, getting a little uneasy on the bike because they're new riders, and then, them cycling throughout Kitsap County and, around Washington, which is really great. We have day rides, and there's others that I'm forgetting about here. But we also give lots of bikes away to young people and to adults. So yeah, that's just a little bit of what I do here at Bikeworks.
Awesome, thank you. Well, we're about 5 minutes over, so I'll give the opportunity for anyone else to have one more question. And we'll send out an email to everybody with some of these links and resources we shared, as well as this recording to share with folks as well. And with that, I will turn it over to our Executive Director, Deb Sauls, to sign us off.
Yeah, Jim, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm in absolute awe of that adventure. And I'm in awe of the reflection you had on its meaning for you. And I'm also in awe of you every day at Bikeworks. So thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone for attending and supporting Bikeworks. We're continuing to find new ways to provide value in the community during these times. And so we're always looking for people who want to tell their story about what biking means to them, or about how they've used the bicycle as a vehicle for change. And changing themselves or changing the community. So let us know if you have a story like that you want to share. You can contact me at deb@bikeworks.org. And we'll have another one of these next month with Denise, who spoke earlier in July. The date's not set yet, but we will get that out to all of you. And thanks again for attending. Thanks, Jim.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your evening and stay tuned for more opportunities like this in the future.